Hi there, I'm Shawn. Welcome to Heroes of on YouTube. We're here on week 3, or week 4, I guess, episode 3, to talk to you more about Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I got a bunch of things to talk to you about today. First thing off the top of the show I wanted to say is that I want to say thank you to Mike Watson for making these amazing t-shirts. Mike's one of the heroes. He's one of the 5 guys that are kind of in this collective, and he spent this week making these really great t-shirts, redesigning the logo. It looks great. I said that I'd wear it, and I'm wearing it right now. It actually fits perfectly. I actually have a video of moments before, or moments after, sorry. Mike unveiled them to us at game night, and I'll roll that clip right now. Down here in the sanctum, that is Mike's basement. This is where we play. So let's just take a look at some of the stuff here. Look at that stuff right there. Look how awesome this is. So we surround ourselves with this every week. That's all his Star Wars cabinet with all of his minis. I'm going to take you over to the D&D cabinet. Look at that dragon right there. Look at all this awesome stuff. I'm going to spin this around, and we're going to show you quickly. Look at these guys right here. New t-shirts. Look at that. Brand new Heroes of t-shirts that Mike made. Look how awesome those are. All right, well, that's it's really cool. It was very exciting that night. It definitely gave us a little boost in morale when having to do this. It had been a rough week trying to find content, and we have a lot of stuff, but it's trying to find the time to put the content up. And then when Mike unveiled those t-shirts, it really gave me a boost of confidence, and it really meant a lot. So thanks, Mike, if you're watching, which you shouldn't be watching too much longer because stuff's coming up you're not allowed to know about. Actually, speaking of spoilers, we have to talk for a second here. I keep forgetting to mention at the top of the show that there might be spoilers for Waterdeep Dragon Heist in this show. I keep forgetting to mention at the top of the show that there might be spoilers for Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I guess I took for granted that a show about a dungeon master preparing to run a module would have spoilers for said module in it, and that B, there'd be anybody watching. Our last episode had like almost 50 viewers, so there's people watching that I could spoil. Granted, like half of those views are probably my family members. I made a joke last week that I had to say thank you to my mom, hi to my mom, because she probably watched the video 20 times. But the truth of the matter is that a bunch of my family is probably watching. I'm going to end up having to commit part of the show to thanking and acknowledging my family members who are watching, much like a podcast does for their Patreon members, having to go through a list of all the people that they'd like to thank. I'm going to have to do the same thing with my family. I'm going to have end up having to thank my aunts and uncles who are watching, and when the last episode doesn't do so well, I'm going to have to throw out my cool cousin Noah's name just to get a bump in viewership. But the truth is that I do have a large family, and probably a lot of the views are probably my family members watching. So in that case, hey Noah, hope school's going well. So what I did is I came up with this little tag, and when I show this tag, that means spoilers are coming up, so you'll know. So that means my players who are watching, you can watch up until I go like this. Sounds good? All right. So let's talk about what this episode's supposed to be about, all right? I want to show you, I had a hard time kind of explaining what it was, so here's what we're going to be talking about. This here is a whole piece of paper. A whole one, okay? And if I split it up into 2 halves. One half, the other half. This is half of a whole piece of paper. So this half is known as a fraction. This is a fraction of the... Sorry? Yeah? Oh, fractions. Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm being told that this episode's not about fractions, but it's actually about factions, which are organizations inside of the city of Waterdeep. My mistake. So let's get to talking about those factions. So there's several different factions inside of Waterdeep that the characters will be able to meet. All right. Initially, this episode was going to have a bunch of interviews with my players, talking about their characters and talking about how they came about making them and what choices they made, why they wanted to be these certain characters, just the process. And also gives you, the viewer, a chance to meet the players. Eventually, we're going to be doing campaign journals where we're going to be talking about our game. And if you have an idea of who I'm talking about when I say Jay, Mike, Phil, or Jack, you'll be able to actually put a face to the name, which I think is kind of be important later. But I wasn't prepared for those interviews. I didn't really come up with a series of questions to ask, and the players didn't fully make their characters yet. They still have a couple of little things here and there to do, and they didn't really want to present their characters as fully done when they weren't. So what we're going to do is we'll wait till the very last episode of the prep videos, and then we'll do little interviews with them, and that'll kind of lead us into the campaign. So talking about what we're going to do is we're still going to talk about factions today, and I'll still tell you a little bit about what their characters are going to be, because they've decided what they're going to be, just not really fully made yet. So we're going to talk about the different organizations and factions. My joke's come back to haunt me now. They're factions inside the city of Waterdeep. These organizations, these factions, are going to be integral to the storyline. Some of them will be against the characters. Some of them will be with the characters. So you'll be able to get aid from the ones that you're with, and hindrances and obstacles to overcome from the ones that you're against. Last week we talked about the main villain. Well, most of those main villains are a part of these factions or are the head of these factions. And so it's kind of an integral part of the whole story. So I thought I'd go through all the different factions that the book has and talk about a little bit about what they are, what they mean to the city, and then we'll talk about the characters that are in the game and how those characters might interact with these factions. It's kind of a way for me to be able to prepare for it. So one of the factions that are in it is Brigand Dareth. Brigand Dareth is run by Jarlaxle. Jarlaxle being one of the four main villains. He's also, if you've read any R.A. Salvatore books, you know who he is. He's a sometimes ally, sometimes villain in the R.H. Salvatore Drizzt Do'Urden books. So their organization, their faction, is made up of mostly of drow. If you're a non-drow, you can be brought into the organization, but you have to be something a little special, I think. Like a tiefling would do, or you have to have some kind of like criminal background. They're looking for straight up mercenaries to do whatever Jarlaxle wants, and most of the time it's a criminal activity. Not all the time. He's a very surprising character, but not all the time, but most of the time. I really don't see any of my characters really being involved with them. I do have, we'll talk about the characters later, but I don't think that there's going to be much interaction with Jarlaxle. But I will throw out, the point is that these factions, all of them, are going to make an offer to the characters once the characters make a name for themselves. Would you like to join up? How about coming with us, Brigand Dareth? We offer all kinds of opportunity. And those players are going to choose whether or not they go with them. And depending on who they choose, there'll be a set of side quests that will kind of explore Waterdeep and kind of make them really ingrained in that organization. So it'll depend on them, but I don't think that they're going to want to have anything to do with the drow mercenaries. Mainly because they don't come off as drow mercenaries. They just come off as mercenaries. They actually wear a disguise, and they don't let the players know right away they're drow. I think that if they would let them know that they were drow, they'd probably join up. But the fact that they're in disguise will probably hinder any chances of my party going with them. So the other one that we have is the Emerald Enclave. The Emerald Enclave is made up of druids and rangers, mostly. Those are the ones that the Enclave really likes to have. They like to keep the natural order of things. So makes sense. Druids are very about nature, and so are the rangers in their way. The rangers are like more protectors of the forest, and druids are more really like protectors of the elements and of the forest as well, but mainly like that they're involved in the bigger things, or the next level stuff. One of the really cool things that I read in the Dragon Heist book was that the druids use their spells and their ability to communicate with animals as a spy network in the city. So the druids in the Emerald Enclave will use their ability to talk to squirrels and rats and birds to be able to gain information on what's happening in the city. That's really cool. That's a very powerful thing. Thank God the Emerald Enclave are the good guys, because if they were the bad guys wielding that kind of power, they could have a stranglehold on the city, I would think. Information-wise, anyways. The next faction is Force Grey. If you saw any of that campaign that Matt Mercer was running on D&D with D&D and with I think it was Nerdist. I think where they were doing it with Nerdist. They ran a Force Grey campaign, so all the characters in that campaign were part of Force Grey. And Force Grey is like a specialized elite adventurers. They can come from any different class, any different race. They don't care. As long as you prove yourself to be of the best of the best, they want you in it. So it's kind of like the snob faction, but for good, because they do really good things in the actual city. Then there's the Harpers. Everyone knows the Harpers. If you're familiarized with Forgotten Realms, you know the Harpers. They're a huge organization that spans all of Faerun. They're bards and wizards and a bunch of different types, but mainly bards and wizards. They do a lot of research, and they are definitely about helping the good and trying to eradicate the evil. They are completely against evil characters and will do anything they can to try and get rid of them. The Lord's Alliance is a faction that only invites in Waterdeep citizens. So if you were born in Waterdeep, they want you, which is silly. I think that if one of the players want to be part of the Lord's Alliance and they're not they're not a citizen of Waterdeep, that could be some interesting role playing there and some interesting storyline stuff. But from according to the book, it says that you have to be really only from Waterdeep. I guess I'm getting a beep. I'll be right. I'm back. Had to answer the door. We had a Christmas wreath just delivered. So the next faction that we have to talk about is the Order of the Gauntlet. They're made up primarily of clerics, monks, and paladins. So they're like a holy order. They are exclusively trying to root out evil in the town and are a really good safe haven for the poor and anybody that needs any aid. They're there to help them. I have a feeling that even though none of the characters are going to be religious in nature, that this might be a place for them at some point. The next one is Xanathar's Guild, which last week we talked about how I picked Xanathar as my main villain. So definitely the characters will not be aligning themselves with them. I will actually not make the offer. There won't be any representatives of Xanathar's Guild to go after them, because I don't want one of them to mistakenly join up, and then I have to kind of do something weird where I figure out how for them to be part of the guild and then also not and also be against them. I don't want to do that at all. I'm an experienced DM, but this is like literally the first time I've run D&D in quite a while, so I want to make sure that I don't create any problems for myself. But they're like a seedy criminal type organization. They're like a thieves guild, classic thieves guild that run underground. They're run by a beholder, which is awesome. If you remember last week's episode, I love beholders. The last one is the Zhentarim. Zhentarim, also known as the Black Network, are another thieves guild type organization made up of mercenaries who are trafficking weapons in the city and doing all those kinds of nefarious things. The interesting about thing about their organization, though, is that there's actually two main things. One, they're exactly opposed to Xanathar's Guild. So in the actual story of Dragon Heist, one of the main plot points of the city is that there is a gang war going on between Xanathar's Guild and the Zhentarim. So you end up coming upon scenes where there's Zhentarim bodies on the ground or Xanathar Guild bodies on the ground. So you see that there is a war going on between these two factions. So your villain that you're going to be facing is, or my players are going to be facing, is Xanathar and his guild. So aligning themselves with the Zhentarim might be a good way of being able to have someone on your side that's already, a friend, an enemy of my enemy is my friend type situation. So the other thing I want to mention about the Zentrum is that within the actual Zentrum organization, within the Black Network, there are actually two different factions. The actual faction has been fractured into two fractions. Huh. That came back around nicely, didn't it? The Zentrum have been split into two factions. How cool is that? Huh? Ah? So yeah, you won't be able to join up with Manchun's side, which is fine because being with the Doom Raiders will give you enough flavor of what the Zentrum are all about. And I feel like there's a high possibility that that's what's going to end up happening. Now let's talk about the characters that are playing. Okay, so Jay is going to be playing a half-elf druid. He hasn't really told me what his background is yet, which could or could not really be super important to these factions. But he's playing a half-elf druid, and he was worried at first whether or not druids would really fit in a urban setting. Normally you think druid, you think nature, you think out down in the mountains and the plains and whatnot, in the forests, but so he was worried about whether or not they fit in, and I was kind of hesitant to tell him about the Emerald Enclave at first because, I want it to be a surprise, right? I want everything to come kind of naturally in surprise. I didn't want him to not be happy about his choices, and I really liked the idea of a druid in the city. I knew that it was going to have some kind of cool things happening. It helps that I watched, the first season of Critical Role, and that Marisha Ray played Keyleth that whole time, and a lot of the things that she was able to do with that druid was really cool in an urban environment, right? Being able to track people by those higher powered spells. They're only getting up to 6th level here, but there were definitely some practical uses for druid spells inside of a city. And then when I read the Emerald Enclave stuff, I realized, I mentioned earlier, the druids are going to be able to use communication with animals for information gathering, kind of like a cleric does with a body. A cleric comes upon a crime scene, there's a body there, they can ask 5 questions of the dead body and get kind of an idea of what's happening. Same thing with the druid. The druid can go and talk to the birds that were sitting on the fence while the killing happened, or the rats that ate the corpse afterwards, and that kind of stuff, right? It'll be really, really interesting, and I think that if he plays it properly, it could be like a druid detective or something. Sounds really cool. So the next player is Phil. Phil came up with a human fighter, and sounds kind of like a prototypical classic character, but I think he's going to end up going down the path of the Battle Master eventually. Phil's the kind of player who likes to have a challenge. He likes to play something a little more complex. He likes there to be tactics, and that's one of the reasons why he likes a wizard so much, because it's really a lot of thought behind it. Whereas a fighter normally is just a hack and slash kind of character, very basic. You just roll a dice and then the damage, and that's it. But the Battle Master seems to have some really cool stuff going on with the maneuvers, and I think that was one of the things that he liked about it. Now, that said, he also made his character randomly. So he made up a table for all the different backgrounds, and then he rolled on that table, and then from that he created his character. He started with the background first, not rolling ability scores, and then choosing a class and a race, and then a background. That's normally how you would do it. He started with the background, and I thought that was really neat. I actually sat right here at this table watching him make the character, and it was really, really interesting. He did so he did his table for his background, and then he rolled a folk hero, and then in folk hero there was in the little blurb at the beginning it said, you could have been from one of these 4 like professions, like it was a miner or carpenter, or it was like 4 or 5 of them. So he rolled the dice, randomly got miner. So now he's like, okay, well, I was a miner growing up before I was a folk hero. And then he rolled all the other ones, like the ideals and the bonds and personality. He rolled all those things, and then at the end of the background came up with this idea that, well, okay, he was a folk hero because he went up against a tyrant, and he was a miner, so he created a story where he and his community were a mining community, and then they were taken over by an organization, and forced to mine as slaves, and then he led a group of miners to revolt against them, and they took back the mine. Now, what ended up happening is that they had to be relocated. Most of the miners had to be relocated into Waterdeep because their mine was pretty much shot. Like they had mined everything that they could out of that mine. It wasn't viable for that community to stay there. So the Lord's Alliance, this is what we came up with. The Lord's Alliance found out about this and accepted the mining community into the city and kind of helped them relocate. I'm not sure why we picked on Lord's Alliance. I think that it made kind of sense. They seem generous, but also with like a background political machinations. So I think that this was a good move for them politically to say, oh look, we're only Waterdevians, but we also help the outside people as well. So the reason why people know him as a folk hero is that all this community, these like hundreds of people that lived in this mining community, have spread word that he led a revolt against these slavers. And so even people in Waterdeep that don't know him have heard of that folk hero who did that. So his name is out there. So anyways, from that, he created another table from the likely classes and the likely races that it would be, and he rolled on those tables and came up with a human fighter. So who was a folk hero background, which is a very interesting way of being able to make a character. I think anyways. It's very, very different, but very interesting. I'm very excited to see him play his character because I think that he's not really super interested in 5e because he's a 3.5 guy. But I think this is something new that he did that kind of made him interested in it. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And then lastly, this is the big one, is Mike's character. Mike's character is Remus Drago. He is a tiefling rogue who's going to go down the path of assassin eventually at level 3. And he is a complex character. Mike wanted to play an evil character. He wanted to pretty much play Dexter in D&D. He wants to play a guy who's pretending to be nice, but is actually a killer. And I had a little bit of problems with that because I don't want violence for violence sake. There has to be a storyline behind it. I tried to push the idea that maybe he's collecting souls for a demon or for a devil, like a devil prince is making him collect souls, and that's why he's doing it. But then that takes away his choice, and he wants to have a choice in the matter. One of the reasons why he went this route is because when he read up on tieflings, he read that a lot of tieflings are trying to live in society like normal people, but their infernal heritage stops them from fully being part of it. They always have people always think that they're doing evil things because they're infernals, because they have infernal blood. And so he thought it would be interesting if there was this guy who was the opposite. Looks like he completely assimilated into society, but is doing those evil things they all think he's doing. And he's allowed to play an evil character. I'm fully supportive of this. And one of the main reasons he wants to do it is he wants to see how long it'll take for the other players at the table to realize he's doing these bad things in the background. I asked him whether or not there was going to be a chance for redemption, and his answer, which was a smart one, was, we don't know yet. And you can't plan for a redemption story. It'll happen or it won't happen. I mean, he could possibly end up dying in the first level. We don't know. One of the big challenges is going to be me running the city watch and the police and all of that part of it. If he's doing bad things in the background, I have to fully represent the law and try to catch him, even though I don't want to catch him because I want him to play the game. So there'll be another layer there that I'll have to deal with, which is fine. I mean, I'm willing to do that for my characters, or for my players. So I think that's really it. We've gone on a little longer than I wanted to. I guess the main thing is to talk about how the Tiefling Rogue will probably be sought after by the Zentrum, and maybe Brigandareth, and maybe Force Grey, depending on how accomplished they get. The Human Fighter will probably be wanted by anybody. Any of those factions that I read to you earlier will want a Human Fighter. Classic Human Fighter, the ability to do crits and all that stuff. That's the champion. But anyways, the ability to fight the way he's going to be able to fight is sought after by all those factions. So I have no problem or worries with Phil and his human fighter being sought after. And then clearly the Emerald Enclave I mentioned earlier will probably want the half-elf druid. So I've got some options there. Those factions will probably seek them, but it'll be really up to the players whether or not they go with them. So that's pretty much it. That's the whole point of all the research I've been doing all this week, is on preparing myself for all these little side missions that the factions could end up doing. Anyways, this was kind of a chopped up, weird episode where I had to edit some stuff out. We had an interruption with the doorbell, which was totally fine. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you did, please comment below. And if you didn't, please comment below and tell me what I can change. Anyways, Heroes of, yeah, Heroes of. I thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye. If you want to reach us and talk to us, you can talk to us at Heroes of Hakathra on Instagram. That's Heroes of HACATHRA, or on Twitter at Heroes of One. Thanks.